Thank you for joining us tonight. We'll be getting started with the webinar in just a moment. Welcome to the Addition Financial webinar, Adulting 101, Youth and Graduate Money Smarts. Our speakers tonight, Valerie Moses and Rich Barbary, are relationship managers sharing their expertise from community engagement and partnerships. Feel free to type your questions in the chat box and we will answer them throughout the presentation. And now I'll hand it over to Valerie.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Adulting 101. We are going to start out by talking about budgeting tonight. We're going to start out by talking about budgeting tonight, followed by some tips on credit. Just to get started, budgeting is really your foundation for financial success, and it means maximizing the efficiency of your dollars. So if you don't have a plan, if you don't have a budget, you don't have a plan.
So the question is, sorry about that, why budget? Budgeting can improve your life because and a couple 4 things right here is number 1, it's going to reveal waste. And what that is I'll give the example of you're out purchasing, let's say lunch every single day while you're working. Every single time, every day that you make that purchase, you're not thinking about this $5 lunch cost me this much throughout the month. You're thinking about it's costing me $5 right now. So once you print out that monthly summary and you see how much throughout those 30, 31 days you're actually spent, that $5 adds up. That's when you start seeing there's some waste being spent from the money that's coming in each month that's going out just to food. It's going to direct your priorities. It's going to create new habits. So instead of going out, for example, to lunch those 5 days a week, you cut it down to, let's say, maybe 2 times. And over a few months, that's going to be a habit for you. You're not really just budgeting and focusing every single day on how much you're spending on lunch. You know that this day, this is when you go out to eat lunch, for example. And this day, this is when you possibly pack lunch. And it's going to reduce your stress. It's common knowledge that finances is one of the things that produces the most stress in your life. So once you're doing something as simple as budgeting, that's going to take a huge amount of that stress off your shoulders.
When you're creating your budget, you really want to allow yourself some flexibility. My budget is going to look very different from Rich's budget, and our budgets may look very different from your budget. So you want to make that budget livable. And that's going to be the surefire way to really stick to it.
I'm gonna be honest, this mouse that we're using is very difficult to navigate through these slides, but
we're having trouble adulting.
But moving along, So how are you going to help yourself succeed? One of the things you're going to do is automate the process. So a good example is using your financial institution to help you save up your money. Automatic transfers from your checking to savings account, let's say, for example, is a good way to do this. Out of sight, out of mind, easy way to start saving. I'll use the example of myself. Every single time my direct deposit comes into my checking account, I have it set up $25, comes from that checking account, goes into my savings account. My financial institution does that for me. So what I'm doing now is building up a nest egg to save in that savings account, could possibly for emergencies or a short-term, long-term, mid-term goal. But I don't have to worry about doing it myself every single week. I have my financial institution doing that for me. You could also set up a payroll deduction. And another thing that you could use to make your finances automated is something called bill pay. Bill pay I love because it's a really simple product that helps you condense all of your payments that you make a month. Once you have 5 to 10 to 12 different bills you have to pay, it could be a lot spread out through a month. Bill pay, very user friendly. You could set up your bills being paid this date of this month, the second week of this month. I like to condense my bills into 2 payments a month, where this group of bills is being sent down and paid by my financial institution, and then this group of bills is being paid by my financial institution as well. Obviously, you want to make sure those payments go out before the due date of each bill, but it kind of gives me control of when these types of bills have to be paid. The largest percentage of your credit score, 35% of it, is going to be your payment history. So something like bill pay helps you really affect that first and largest percentage of your credit score. And there goes that mouse again.
When you're tracking your spending, when creating that budget, you really want to be accurate. The more accurate you are, the better you're going to be able to maximize those funds, as we talked about. So as you're tracking your money, we're going to get into some tools later in the presentation to maximize technology to your benefit. When you're creating your budget, if the same expenses are popping up regularly, you want to add a new category to your budget. So again, as I mentioned before, we all have different priorities, different lifestyles. What may make sense in my budget may not make sense in yours. So if you find that you're spending a lot of money on a particular item pretty regularly, you may just want to add that into your budget. And that's why you do want to create a livable, flexible budget.
Step 1, we're going to be smart. We're going to be specific, avoid being vague and setting your goals. We're going to be measurable, and we're going to decide how much it will cost to achieve your goal. It's going to be attainable, ensure your goals are within reach. Realistic, think within your own financial means. So let's say gas, bills, you don't want to try and tighten those things in your budget. You want to be as realistic as you possibly can with it. Don't say I'll spend only $100 this month if you drive a lot for work and gas, just so you could put more money in your budget towards your personal line item. You want to make sure you're realistic with things such as that. And then time bound. You want to give your goals an end date. So if you have a savings goal, let's say down payment on a car, for example, have yourself a real goal that you could obtain that dollar amount and save to reach it. Which leads me into time frame. So as you have goals in life, you want to make sure you have financial goals along with it. You got your short-term goal, mid-term goal, long-term goal. So we're going to make it pretty simple for you on here. Short-term goal, what I like to do for my short-term goal as an example is I know every 2 years my cell phone will get an update and it'll stop working. So I'll have to get a new cell phone. I've learned that a long time. I'd still be using the iPhone 3 if it would still work. But unfortunately, I like to make sure when I purchase that new phone, I buy it in full. So I am just paying for the service of that plan, which will lower my bills budget when I'm budgeting. So what I do is I know every 2 years, so there's 2 paychecks each month, 12 months out of a year, I have to save up this dollar amount to make that full payment on the cell phone. Let's say, for example, it's $1,000 to purchase that phone. I do the math. I know I need to save this dollar amount each month. Same thing goes for my midterm goal. I want to put a down payment down on a car, let's say in about 5 years. This many paychecks, obviously the math gets a little bit more difficult for you. But this many paychecks, this many months throughout 5 years, this is how much I have to save to reach that goal of, let's say, $5,000 to put towards my car, which will lower my monthly payment. And then again, making bills that are going out every single month that have to be paid lower, helping my budget. And then long-term goal, that could be retirement, paying off student debt, any type of really long-term, putting a down payment on a house, any type of real long-term goal. Do some research on it, start planning now, and you'll thank yourself in the future. One of the cool things I know that we do at Addition Financials are sub-savings accounts, where they work perfectly to reach these goals. So I use my sub savings account for my short-term goal and my midterm goal. I use my regular savings account for my emergency savings, where those automatic transfers go in, and then I actually start putting more money towards these types of goals that I have set up for myself.
So after you've determined your goal, you next want to determine what is your regular income. So you want to think about what is your take-home pay that is actually hitting the checking account each pay period. So don't look at that gross pay, even though that higher number is really appealing to think about when you're thinking of your regular income. You really want to think about what's going into your actual account. You don't want to include overtime pay because this is not going to be typical for every pay period. You can then, when you do receive overtime, put that money away toward that emergency savings or toward your goals, but don't include that in the regular budget as your regular income. And then next, you want to determine your expenses. So those fixed expenses that are the same from month to month, the flexible expenses, and then the discretionary are going to be those wants. And we're going to get into kind of how to really formulate that budget and what goes into the wants versus the needs. But you want to make sure, first of all, that those fixed expenses are going to be paid for.
So a lot of steps. A good way to utilize or actually make it more easier on yourself to budget after going through all those steps is a couple of these apps that we listed below us. We are not sponsored by these apps, so we're just giving them a nice little plug. I've actually been using the Mint app since college. So once I started up college, it was a good time for me, I figured, to start budgeting. The Mint app is a free tool to use. I know these other two apps are free as well. And it actually does the budgeting for me. So just like how I was saying before, have your financial institution do the savings for you. Just set it up on your online and mobile banking. Works the same way with budgeting. I choose, once I decide to create these steps, I create my line items. I'm realistic with it, like I said before. So I'm being smart. I'm creating a line item for myself, for my personal purchases, my needs, my wants, like we saw in steps 2 and 3. And then as I make these purchases, these budgeting apps will fill in these line items for me to say you spent this much of your gas budget and you had this much left till you reach your cap of your budget. So it's really going to make budgeting simple for you, and it's going to help you create it into a routine, which we said earlier when we were talking about being smart, where you're just checking your budgeting app every single day. You're out making these purchases, but now it feels like it's just an everyday routine for you. You know when you could purchase this and that. So these apps, give them a look. It makes budgeting really simple for you, just like how we talked about making savings really simple for you.
Now, while you're creating that budget, you want to make sure that you have a checking account that really works for you. So when you're shopping around for credit for a checking account, you always want to look at financial institutions and see who has the best checking products. So ask yourself, if you're a college student, find out, do these financial institutions offer something special for you as a college student? So for example, at Addition Financial, we have our awesome Aspire accounts where there's no minimum balance requirement. We waive certain fees for college students to make it a little bit easier for them. You don't have to be a certain age. It's simply for 5 years while you're in school to make it a little bit easier for you. Find out if the financial institution that you're currently banking at offers those types of products and ask those questions. There are different types of fees you want to look out for that Rich will get into shortly in the presentation. But ultimately with those checking accounts, you want to make sure that wherever you're banking is going to be accessible for you. So online and mobile banking are especially important, especially right now in these days of social distancing. To be able to access your funds easily without having to go into a branch. This is so important as a college student. You're busy, you're taking classes, going to work. You might as well have a checking account that's working for you and that's accessible for you when you're on the go. Bill pay, which Rich talked about earlier, have something convenient with branches and ATMs that are conveniently located, and then having your direct deposit linked to that checking account is going to make life a lot simpler while building that budget.
All right, so now the exciting part with checking account, your fees. So checking account, most basic form of banking you're going to do is where your direct deposit goes in, and this is where you use your debit card to make your transactions. And as we all know, there's fees associated to it. So you have your monthly maintenance fee. That is a fee just for a financial institution to hold your finances every single month. You're going to have your minimum balance fee. So if you go below this certain amount between your checking and savings account, you'll get hit with the fee. You're going to have a foreign ATM fee. So you go to a ATM, you make a withdrawal from that ATM, which is outside of your branch service network. You're going to get hit with a fee. And then we have courtesy pay or overdraft, courtesy pay being the larger of the fees that we went over. One cool way that I like to, or I think the most simple way to avoid the first two fees associated with the checking account is setting up some type of direct deposit into that checking account. So there may be a certain dollar amount each month that you have to have going into that checking account. But most financial institutions, if you have direct deposit going in, they will waive both of these fees. So those are two fees associated with the checking account that you'll be avoiding. Foreign ATM fee, I like to use Addition Financial as an example. But we have partnership with Presto at Publix location, so you can use all of those ATMs and avoid a fee outside of our branch network. So as you guys know, there's a Publix on almost every single street in Central Florida. So you can use one of those ATMs and get your cash without a fee. Other financial institutions do this as well. So about your 7-Eleven, your CVS, your Walgreens, the Wawa, Racetrack, you can go to those ATMs. Depending on your financial institution and avoid a fee. But a lot of times people that are opening up an account with a financial institution don't ask these questions and don't know where their out of service ATM network is. So it's a good question to ask with your current financial institution, or if you're looking at a new one, where's their out of service ATM network? I know people don't use ATMs like they used to, but we need to get cash on hand. It's a good way to avoid a fee where you know you can go that's close to you and make that withdrawal from an ATM. Then you have courtesy pay. Legally, you have to opt in or out of this when you're opening up a checking and savings account. Courtesy pay, $35 fee if you go negative in your account. If you accept to have courtesy pay, they will fund the account for you, so it's good for emergencies. Let's say you're stuck somewhere, you have to get gas, there's not enough in your account to make that purchase. Financial institution will fund the account for you. You'll make that transaction, but you'll have to deal with a $35 fee. Now, depending on the financial institution, it'll depend on how quickly after you make that transaction and go negative, where they'll hit you with the fee. Maybe you don't get feed a lot in your account with your financial institution. This is a one-time thing that's happened to you. They'll reimburse you that fee. So those are questions that you're going to want to ask before you decide to opt in or out. But remember when I was talking about earlier with bill pay, if you don't have courtesy pay and your financial institution is trying to pay a bill for you and you don't have enough in your account, obviously that bill will be blocked. Courtesy pay, they won't be able to make the payment for you. So you're going to affect that 35% of your credit score, your payment history. And then you may get feed by the lender that you're paying on the other end of things because of a late payment. So there's definitely a negative and positive to either opting in or opting out of courtesy pay. If you opt out, naturally your card will just be declined. You won't get that courtesy pay fee associated to it, but you won't have that safety net as well. Then you have overdraft, where they'll transfer money from your savings account, into your checking account, with a much smaller fee associated to it. So if you wanted to have some type of safety net attached to your checking account, you can set it up where you have overdraft. They'll take that money from your savings. They'll transfer immediately over to your checking account. You'll get a small fee with it, but you'll be able to make that transaction as well. So those are the four fees, or the four big known fees that we're talking about today with your checking account. And those are just a couple of tips on how you're able to avoid them.
So we're going to get into some more of these budget busters. Now, those fees are all considered budget busters because with proper budgeting, you really can find ways to avoid them. But getting into some of the others, cable television, I think, is one of the big ones. So many of us now are cutting the cord with cable. I'm not suggesting that you have to do that, but you want to evaluate, do you have cable and several streaming services, and are all of those necessary? Look at what you have and, look at places that you can cut back. With cable television, I also like to encourage people, you can call your cable provider and try to negotiate the payment on those. If you're bundling cable and internet, for example, a lot of times the companies will offer promotional rates. And if you call your cable provider and let them know, hey, I pay on time every month, and ask them about what they can do for you. A lot of times they do want to keep you as a customer and they will be willing to negotiate with you. Worst case, they say no, but the answer is always going to be no if you don't ask. So cable television, I think, is one of those big budget busters that you can cut back, and I have been able to really lower that cable and internet bill just by calling and having that conversation. Entertainment costs, I think, are a huge one that especially college and high schoolers may fall into, along with going out to eat. Now, currently, with the social distancing going on, those types of expenses may be a little bit lower because we are staying at home these days. So I encourage you to put that money away and put that toward your emergency savings. Put that toward the goals that you have, or toward other unexpected expenses that may be popping up because of the situation that we're currently in. For entertainment costs, I also encourage you as a college student or recent graduate with that college ID, a lot of times you can get discounts to local attractions and even local retailers. Going out to eat is one of the biggest expenses that we see, not just among college students, but really just about everybody. We have a lot of food waste with going out for groceries, maybe buying more than we necessarily need, and then also going out to eat. So you want to, a great way to be able to plan around this is to create a meal plan at the beginning of the week, build in what meals you're going to be having out and what meals you're going to be cooking at home. And that will really help you to save money on that food. Because again, going out to eat is a huge expense that we see, even for that casual dining, a little bit of Chipotle here, Tijuana Flats there, et cetera. Those expenses can really add up. Of course, living outside of your means. Another one that I want to point out are gym memberships. If you're a college student, if you go to University of Central Florida, as a UCF graduate, I'm very aware of the beautiful gyms that they have on campus. You are paying for those gym memberships out of your college tuition, whether you realize or not. So it makes sense if you're a college student and you already have these great resources available for you on campus, maybe don't join an additional gym, outside of what you already have on campus. Really look at those and see where you can trim those expenses. And then shopping habits, don't go to the grocery store hungry. That is a huge mistake we see for a lot of people. And of course, make a list before you go to the store and really only buy what's on the list, because ultimately the BOGOs can get you and they can add up. And that discount section at Target that a lot of us are guilty of, while those items may be inexpensive, they really do add up over time and can really get you in the long run.
Do love a good Publix BOGO. I will have to admit.
Yes.
And I don't go to the gym, so that's something I save in my budget. Okay, so some myths, I definitely believed in a lot of these myths when I was in college, but as I started to budget, I learned that these myths weren't necessarily true. As in number one, budgeting means giving up on something. The good way to avoid doing this is creating yourself a personal purchase line item. Okay, this is a line item where you're going to be realistic. You're not going to say $500 each month is going to go to spend on whatever I would like. But after you decide where all of those needs has to go, you're going to want to create yourself a want line item. Okay, and that means you're not giving up on your purchases. You're just going to avoid buyer's remorse. You're going to know what you can afford to purchase for yourself that month. A good budget is strict, and that's also a myth. It does not have to be. When you start out budgeting, you can kind of condense some of those line items into one, make it more simpler for you. You do want to check it every single day, but it doesn't have to be very, very strict. Those first couple of months, you're going to be trying to create a routine for you with your budget to see what works and what doesn't, but it doesn't have to be a very, very strict budget. And those apps make it very easy for you to make that budget as simple and as customizable to yourself as you can. I'm too broke to budget. I find that a funny one because you're broke because you don't budget. And then budgeting is for those who are struggling. I don't believe that to be true either. Really wealthy people stay wealthy because they are budgeting their money. They know where their money goes. Someone can get $1 million and lose it really quickly. If you're budgeting and you're staying top on your finances, you're going to have that financial freedom, whether you make $300,000 a year or $50,000 a year. You're living within your means, and that's the whole point of budgeting. So it does not have to be for someone that makes, not over 6 figures a year. It could be someone that makes even college paychecks while you're still in college. You're living within your means. That's the whole point of a budget, no matter how much you make.
So when you're creating that budget, you want to create some balance in the budget. And that's why we like to talk about this 50-30-20 guideline. And this is a model that you can use to help you remember how to allocate your spending. And now again, this can differ a little bit as you're, fine tuning your budget. You may find that you want to put more towards savings or, more toward your essentials, but this is a good guideline to get you started. So that 50% is going to go toward your needs. Those essentials like paying your rent, keeping the lights on in your apartment or house, paying for your car, gas, food, not necessarily going out to eat, but having enough food to live and those groceries. The next 30% is going to be focused on your wants. That's that lifestyle that we talk about. And then 20% should be going towards savings. Now, a lot of us are not necessarily saving 20%. You want to build up to that. If you aren't already, any little bit that you're saving is going to get you into a good habit and it is going to make a difference. But we encourage you to try to get up to 20%, putting that money toward those things that you want long term, paying off debts if you have, and also paying for, emergencies in the long run. It's getting you into a good habit. Unfortunately, in Central Florida with the I-4 project, I have had to purchase emergency tires a couple of times. One time I had to get 2 tires at the same time. These
Emergency savings account.
Yes.
There you go.
These emergencies can be really stressful, but it takes a little bit of the stress out of the equation when you know you have the money to cover it. So put that money toward those emergencies and also put that savings toward those things that you want long term. So looking at your needs versus your wants, as I mentioned before, those needs are going to include your housing, your utilities, transportation, groceries, anything that you need to survive that's going to get you through your day. Your wants, those can be really difficult from person to person. So you need to have some wiggle room so that you can get those things that you want. Because again, you want to make that budget livable. You want it to fit your lifestyle. A good rule of thumb that I like to think of when, when budgeting and when making decisions about those wants is a rule of thumb that my dad taught me when I was in college. And he said that when you were thinking about making a purchase and it was something you didn't necessarily need, to think about the number of hours of work that it would take to be able to purchase that item. So think about, if this is going to take me a full day's work to purchase this thing, ask yourself, is it worth it or is it not? And for some of the time, it absolutely is, and you should indulge yourself and, enjoy your money. But sometimes it's absolutely not worth it. And when you put it into those terms and you really think about the work that goes in to purchase the item, you may no longer want it. So now that we've talked about budgeting, we're going to dive into credit a little bit. Rich will be getting into some of the impact of credit and why it's so important. But ultimately, credit is the money that you're being given now, but you must pay it back in the future. So your credit score is your reputation as a borrower. If somebody is going to give you something of value, such as a job or an auto loan or a mortgage, they're going to want to look at that reputation or that credit first.
And then leading into impact of credit score. But we do have a good question that goes over that is asked, if I have debt now, what should I be prioritizing? Paying off debt or saving? And that's actually a very good question because people who aren't saving right now may have debt and they're wrapped into paying the minimum payments on a credit card and they're not really saving right now in the first place. And what you should do is maybe lower those dollar amounts that are going into your savings accounts that we're talking about, emergency savings, savings for a short-term, mid-term, long-term goal. Maybe seeing if you could lower those payments that you're making into those savings account every single month, and those dollar amounts that you're taking away from those savings, add it to paying off your debt. Because again, your debt sitting on your credit score is going to affect it the most. And the lower the credit score that you have, the more it's going to cost you for your every single day life, which we're going to actually go over right now when we get into impact. Number one, we have job opportunities. So jobs are going to run, most employers are going to run your credit score when you are hired. And the reason that is most employers believe if you are not responsible with your money, that could lead to you not being responsible at work. And another good reason is when we said earlier that your finances are one of the most stressful things in your life. So if you're having problems with your finances, that stress you could bring with you to the workplace. So job opportunities, you could lose out on some job opportunities based on your credit score. Utilities and cell phones. So your utilities, your cell phones, they run your credit score. Most of them are going to be a soft credit check, but they are going to check. And these things may cost you more compared to someone that's sitting there or applying for these with a healthy credit score. Same thing with your banking products. You're going into even just a traditional checking account. You may not be approved for a traditional checking account all the way to a car loan or a mortgage, and your rental housing opportunities. So you may not be approved for your rent. They're going to run your credit score, or your rent's going to cost you more money. So it's going to be really tough to budget, save up your money, or pay off debt that you currently have if things like your cell phone, your car insurance, your banking loan products, or your rental housing opportunities are all costing you more money a month. So you're going to want to pay down that debt as quick as possible so you get that healthy credit score. So when you're doing things like this that you have to do in your every single day life, they're costing you less money. And when I touched on earlier, when you get into utilities, cell phones, banking products, you'll see more of a hard credit check. A soft credit check is they're checking that credit score number that's associated with you. They're not going into 7 years of your banking history like they would if you were applying for a mortgage or a car loan. That would be where a hard credit check would come in. A soft credit check is just like you checking your credit score on your own on one of those websites.
So we're going to show you a really good illustration of how much credit can affect your future and how much having a better credit score is going to positively impact you. So we're looking at two people purchase the same vehicle for the same amount of time, but one person has good credit and one person has bad credit. So the person with good credit purchases the $12,500 car at a finance rate of 1.99%, really nice promotional rate for a term of 60 months. The person with bad credit, same cost of the car, same term, but they're financing at a rate of 14.5%. So as you can see here, the person with bad credit is going to be paying a lot more for the cost of financing the vehicle. The person with good credit has a monthly payment of $220, while the person with bad credit has $292. So it's only a difference of $72 per month. But over the total life of the loan, the person with good credit is paying $624 in interest. The person with bad credit is paying close to $5,000 in interest. So as you can see, the difference for the entire loan, it costs $4,331 more for the person with bad credit to borrow the same car for the same amount of time as the person with good credit. So that's why it's so important to be building good credit or rebuilding your credit so that you can, you can afford the cost of, purchasing a vehicle and not get into ridiculous amounts of interest paid, like you see here with the huge difference.
That's a great example of how things will cost you more each month if you have a bad credit score compared to a good credit score.
Absolutely.
So thank you for that, Val. Okay, so very important slide in my opinion. This is what goes into your credit score. We've been talking about the last couple of slides, and now we're going to tell you how you can, or what's actually going into it and how you can affect it in a positive way. So I touched on it earlier, payment history, 35% of your credit score. Do you pay your bills on time? It's as simple as that. Obviously, in some situations in life, it may be difficult to pay for a bill when it is due, but that's what goes into, takes the largest percentage of your credit score is your payment history. Amount owed. So I like to use the example, this is 30% of your credit score. So these two things right here, taking up over, if my math is correct, 50% of what goes into your credit score. So I like to use the example of, I have a $10,000 limit credit card. I am carrying a balance over 30% of my limit. So pretty simple math here. I'm carrying a balance every single month of $3,500. That is going to affect my credit score, 30% of it. I'm carrying a very large balance compared to my limit. Length of credit history is going to be 15%. You're going to want to, I guess we'll use a credit card again as an example. When you apply for a credit card, you want to make sure you have it for a long period of time. Okay, so NerdWallet's a good resource that I use. I like to or apply for a credit card that's going to affect my every single day life. I drive a lot for work. I want a credit card where I get a lot of benefits for purchases on gas. I shop at Target a lot. Maybe I go for a credit card at Target where I save 10%. Every single purchase. I think it's 10%. I don't know, 5%. It's not a plug for Target or NerdWallet, but just some resources for you to look at. And the reason I do that is credit cards are supposed to be there to help you build up your credit score, and you can get some points and rewards with these credit cards that you wouldn't get with a debit card. The key is, though, you have to stick to your budget that we created earlier. You stick to your budget, you won't worry about carrying a balance that's over 30%, which is going to affect your credit score a lot, or spending more than you're actually bringing in every single month. Those limits on those credit cards could actually be higher than what your income is every single month. So that's where you see that debt come up. And so the budget is the key to making sure that you don't spend more or creating debt every single month. So length of credit history, back to my original point, when you apply for these credit cards, you want one that you'll keep for a long period of time because you're getting the most use out of them. It's not just going to be a credit card that you're going to make a large purchase with, pay it off over time, and then once you finally pay it off, you're going to close that credit card or that type of loan. So you're going to want to make sure this is a card that you're going to use for a long period of time. You're going to want to make sure you have a healthy portfolio of credit. So that's about 10%. So if you have about 2 car loans, which this is just an example, 2 car loans in your household with your family, you have about 3 credit cards, you have a mortgage, they're all in good standing, you haven't missed any payments with them, that's a good portfolio of credit. If you have 7 credit cards, you have 2 car loans where you've missed a payment, or a pickup or a tow truck was taking one of your cars off the driveway because you missed too many payments, that's not a healthy portfolio of credit. So you want to take a look at your credit. If you check your credit score online, there's some tools on there that'll show you what's affecting it and what's affecting in a negative way or in a positive way. But you want to make sure you have a healthy portfolio of credit. And then obviously new credit, you don't want to go online and apply for a bunch of different lines of credit, whether it be a credit card or a personal loan, where you're getting declined often. If you're applying for a car loan and you're getting approved and you have a healthy credit score, that's not going to affect your credit score in a negative way. But if you're online and applying for all these different types of credit cards, you're getting declined, that's going to affect your credit score, and that's going to take up 10% of it. So the first 2 there, payment history, 35%, amount owed, 30%, that's 65% of what goes into your credit score. Your length of credit history, that's 15%, and then the lower 2, 10%, types of credit and new credit, and that's what's still going to go into your credit score.
So some ways to really maintain a healthy score. You're going to hear us say this a lot, but ultimately the best way to really build your credit score is going to be to pay on time every time. Try to pay off your balances every month if possible, because it is going to, in the long run, help your credit score, and you won't be paying extra interest on the things that you've purchased. Something that I like to recommend, especially for students who maybe haven't had a credit card for long, you're just getting your first one, or you're really just developing your habits with a credit card, put something on the card that you know you're going to pay off every month. So for example, a tank of gas. Get into the habit of paying that card off from month to month, and really build out that budget so that you know what's going into it and that you're paying off that balance. Diversifying your credit portfolio. So as Rich talked about, having a healthy mix, having credit cards and an installment loan like an auto loan, having a mortgage, things like that, that's ultimately going to help you diversify, and it is going to help your score. And then, of course, not maxing out your credit cards. So as we talked about before, if you owe a lot of money compared to what's being lent out to you, it's not going to look great to the creditors. It's going to look like you may not have the capacity to pay it back. So that's why it's so important to not max out your credit cards in order to really maintain that credit.
Okay, so building credit. You want to understand all the terms and conditions before signing. So I talked about NerdWallet earlier. Whenever you apply for any type of card, car loan, mortgage, personal line of credit, I always like to use the 24-hour rule. Do as much research as you can. Sleep on it. Think about it again in the morning. This is going to be something that's going to come up on your credit score, and you want to make sure you use it to the best of your ability. So when we do this presentation a lot for college students, we use credit cards as the example, because once they finish up school, that's one of the first things they look to apply for, is going to be a credit card, because they feel more mature once they have one and they want to start making more purchases on it. So the first thing you should do is do as much research as you can, have that budget. When you have these cards, like I said earlier, that it's there to help you rebuild, or not rebuild, but build credit. If you don't have established credit score, It's there to help you build up your credit score or rebuild it. So you want to make sure that you don't exceed 10 to 20% of your monthly take-home income. You want to pay more than the minimum payments due on time. So you don't want to get stuck into that minimum payment problem, right? The scary part to that is, let's say you spend $2,000, or it could be even upwards. You have $5,000 in debt on a credit card. You're going to see that minimum payment. You're going to think it's really low and affordable. But then you're going to look right over to the right of it, and it's going to say it's going to take you this long to pay off that credit card. So that should be the eye-opening situation for you, where you say, I'm going to start putting more money towards this credit card or this payment, so I can lower that as much as I possibly can. And you're going to save yourself on interest. Okay. And then you're going to be sure to check your own credit at least once a year. You don't want to check your credit score for a couple of reasons. One, again, like I said earlier, it's going to show you what's actually hurting it the most. It's going to show you what's helping it the most, and what you, along with what type of products you've applied for. But you also want to check to make sure that there's nothing on there that you didn't apply for yourself, and that your information hasn't been hacked, and that there is no types of credit or loans that's applied for in your name. So it's good to check your credit score at least once a month. Once a year, and see that, make sure everything on there is correct, and that you're doing all the right things you can do to build up your credit score.
So when building and rebuilding your credit, just some tips and tricks. You want to live within your means. So as we talked about, really focusing on having a good budget, focusing on that 50, 30, 20 model, putting, that 20% toward either savings or debt repayment, living again within your means. So not putting that extra 20% toward those things you really want right now, but really focusing long term, because having better credit is going to help you a lot in the long run. You're going to be able to create healthy money habits again through that budget is a really great way to do that. That will really allow you to pay on time every time, like we talked about. Making and following a budget, of course, and using some of those tools that Rich talked about earlier in the presentation, automating it and using some of these apps, using technology to your advantage is really going to help you in the long run. Prioritizing your spending. So with that 50, 30, 20 model, ultimately the most important thing is to be able to pay for those things that you absolutely need to live. Make sure that those necessities are being taken care of before you hit the discount bin at Target, or some of those things that we really want. You want to prioritize that spending, and ultimately paying off debt is going to help you in the long run, because you're going to be able to afford a lot more. You're going to have that better credit score, and it's going to help you, with your future. Reducing that debt, and then save, not just for debt repayment, but also for that emergency savings, so that if you do hit that nail on I-4 and have to buy 2 tires in the same day, it's no more stressful than it has to be. Saving for the future and saving for emergencies is going to make those emergencies that much easier to deal with.
We're going to pause for a brief intermission to review your questions, and we'll be back in just a moment.
All right, so we're here to answer some of your questions. So one of the first questions is your credit score affected by the bills that you pay? That's a great question. So your credit score is only going to be affected by your bills if you're not paying them and it's reported to collections. So unfortunately, paying your rent from month to month on time every time is not going to necessarily positively affect your credit, but it is going to negatively impact your credit if you don't pay on time every time. So that's why you want to make sure you're still paying your bills, because they will ultimately negatively impact your credit if you don't pay them. Another question that we had was, should you review your credit report through your bank accounts or through Credit Karma, and will that affect your score? So we recommend that you check your credit once a year. Now, there are 3 different credit bureaus that you can check through. It will not impact your score: TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. And so what my suggestion is to check each. You get one credit report for free every year from each one. So I would say every 4 months, pull your credit from a different bureau. And that is ultimately not going to affect your score. Credit Karma is pulled a little bit differently. They're not doing a hard pull on your credit, and it will not affect your score at all.
All right. We also got a question about 401ks. So I'll give a little bit of advice that I have on 401k, because every single employer is going to offer you a different type of 401k package. One of the first things you're going to look at is what is the match from your employer of what you will contribute to your 401k. So I'll give the example of, let's say my employer is offering me a 5% match. Automatically, you should match yourself from your paycheck pre-tax, your 5% yourself. So that way you have now 10% being invested into your 401k. If you're a younger person looking to work for a long period of time, you're going to want to go risky with your 401k. And if you're someone that has retirement on the horizon, you're going to want to go a little bit more moderate with your 401k, okay? Because again, your 401k is going to act like a mutual fund. So you don't want to have that loss on your 401k right before you're getting ready for your retirement date. Another good question to ask your human resources team, because again, everybody's 401k is going to be completely different. It's important to answer or ask all the right questions, is how long do I have to work with my employer until I am fully invested in my 401k? It's a good question to ask. I don't think a lot of people do it. What that means is, let's say I work for an employer for 4 years and it's 5 years to be fully invested, and I leave at 4 years and 10 months. That contribution I was getting from my employer that entire time, I now lose, and I only get my contribution that I was contributing over those 4 years and 10 months. You want to know how long do I have to work with my employer to make sure that their money that they've been contributing, I will get to keep once I leave or retire from my employment. Another question that we got is about overdraft and courtesy pay fee. And let's see if I could pull that up. Okay, so what fees do you have to pay when you have a debit card? So that's where we roll into our overdraft and courtesy pay. So if you're using a debit card, some of the fees you can run to is a foreign ATM fee, but then again, you have your typical overdraft and courtesy pay attached to it. If you go negative in your checking account by using your debit card, you could do it through your bill pay by being affected by courtesy pay, but also if you use your debit card as well, you could run into that fee with courtesy pay as well.
Now, one question we received, can I reduce my interest rate on my current credit card without closing it out and having to apply for a new one if you've had the card for a long time? So this is going to differ by financial institution, but it never hurts to ask. So reach out to your financial institution. If you've been paying the card off on time from month to month, you've been, reliably paying it off, it doesn't hurt to ask. Some are willing to lower that rate for you, but it really does differ by financial institution.
Okay, so we got another myth thrown at us, and I do love a good myth. Is paying off your credit card monthly to $0 a bad thing for your credit? And the answer is no. If you're using your card and you're making transactions to it and you're sticking to your budget, you're paying your card off in full every single month, it is not going to affect your credit score in a negative way. A lot of times people think, if I leave a little bit of a balance over, that's going to affect my credit score in a positive way compared to paying it off in full, because obviously the creditors or the credit card company that you're using wants to collect that interest from your purchases. But the best way to do it is you make your purchases with that credit card monthly, you pay it off in full, And then you avoid your interest also attached on the card that you'll be charged, and it will not come up poorly on your credit score.
Is it better to pay down a high balance card or a high interest rate card first? So there are a lot of different rules of thumb on this. Everybody has a different philosophy. Some even say to pay off the lowest balance or the lowest interest rate first, to do kind of a snowball effect. So you're paying off the first one, the smallest one first, then going to the next largest one and the next largest one, so that's snowballing. If you pay the highest balance card first, mathematically, it is going to save you the most in the long run, but it really is up to you and your particular, your preferences. Are you going to feel mentally better if you've paid off more of them, or if you're saving a little bit of money on the interest? And that, again, it really differs by person and by preference. But as long as you're putting a little bit of extra money toward one of those bills and focusing on paying, one at a time, in addition to those minimum payments on the other one, you're in good shape.
And I believe that is all the questions we have for this evening. One of the last things I wanted to say is just to overview what we talked about. This is your basic, simple form of banking. You have your credit card, you have your checking, your savings account. You're going to want to utilize that savings account, make it easy for yourself, set up your automatic transfers, have your financial institution do it for you. When you have your checking account, know what the fees are, know how you can avoid them, and then start utilizing those budgeting tools that we talked about. They'll do the budgeting for you. It's all about making your finances as simple as you possibly can for yourself. And especially out of college, I know that's something that you're going to want to do, is make your finances as easy as you possibly can, because you have so many other things you have to deal with once you graduate school.
Now, if you had any questions we didn't get to today, we will be getting with our team and we'll be sending the answers out later on with the presentation. So you will get your questions answered as well.
Thank you, Valerie and Rich. This concludes our presentation tonight. Check your inboxes tomorrow for an email containing a link to tonight's recording, and thank you all again for joining us. Have a good night.